Hi, my name is Aoife and I am a senior. I was homeschooled and I'm just finishing up my AA at Running Start, Olympic College. And I have been writing for what seems like forever. I've always loved reading and I picked up writing at a really young age. I write everything from songs to poetry to novels to English papers. And I think one of my favorite things about writing is definitely the creative expression that comes out of it, and words can express my feelings, I think, in ways that other outlets can't. And I would definitely advise everyone to write, and for aspiring writers, don't be afraid to mimic, because mimicking can sometimes help you discover your own style, and I've had a lot of fun with that. Anyway, I will be reading my story, Through Eyes of Light, and I was kind of inspired to write this. It just kind of dropped into my head, really, and once I saw the picture, so it came out pretty complete, and I just had to do a little polishing. But yeah, I really like the way it turned out, and I hope you enjoy it. Gas was 97 cents the day Tatum Woods tied the Simmons kid to the railroad tracks. I don't know why I remember the exact price, but I can still see the big green sign and the bright numbers blurred in the hot Alabama sun. I remember the look on the kid's face, too, staring as Tatum herded him past the gas station, his yellow-green eyes hollowed and alarmed, peering out from under a cloud of curly hair. I'd never seen a colored person with light eyes before, until the Simmons moved into the old Vandermeyer house down the street. My mama said it was because the Simmons kids were mixed. Their mama was white, like mine, but their daddy was full-colored. The kids looked more like their daddy, except for the lighter skin, the color of Halloween caramels. They had that wide snub nose, poofy lips, and that crazy nappy hair that was all over the place. No one really knew why the Simmons had moved here in the first place. Most colored folk lived in the city, not in the suburbs. Mr. Simmons had a job, taking the early morning train into the city and the mid-afternoon train back home. People said it was because he liked the environment and didn't want to leave his old co-workers, but Daddy said it was because no one had offered him a job here. Being different was no reason to dislike them, but here was Tatum, still marching Simmons Jr. to the railroad, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything. My throat was so tight with anger that if I tried to speak, breaths would come out instead of words. I didn't honestly think Tatum was going to follow through. I thought he was talking big to impress Hollister, Addison, Durant, and I, but I knew he meant business when he pulled the rope out of his pocket, announcing that he was tying the kid to the railroad tracks and we could just try and stop him. I stood and watched him walk away, dragging the kid with him. The rest of the boys followed until there were mere shadows watering in the sun. Then I started the walk home, feeling unsettled and worried. The impenetrable, constricted look on the kid's face still hovered before my eyes. I tried to blink it away, forget I'd ever tossed the kid my football this morning, and that, in the shivering haze of the sun, his eyes were the same color as mine. "Hello, Elijah." Mrs. Simmons smiled at me, walking down the street in one of those nice-looking sundresses magazine models wore. She looked like any of the ladies in my mom's book club, with long, sleek hair the same tow-headed blonde as mine, the butter yellow my mama called sun-kissed. "Hi, Mrs. Simmons. How are you doing?" I felt guilty talking to her when her son was off being beat on by a bunch of my friends. I spoke low, trying to hurry the conversation along. She didn't seem to notice my anxiety. "Oh, fine. Just walking down to the railroad to meet Joshua." Joshua was Mr. Simmons, and he was supposed to be coming home in an hour. "I thought he'd be on the 4 o'clock train, ma'am." I breathed, the pitter-patter of my heart speeding up. Mrs. Simmons shook her head. "It's half an hour early, LJ. Just heard it on the radio." Yes, ma'am," I mumbled, feeling the ghost of a train rumbling along under my feet. I'd better go now. If you'll excuse me." I was running already, my Nike slamming into the hot pavement with a rhythm eerily similar to the chicka-chicka-chicka of the train. It was a good 15-minute walk to the railroad, but if I ran hard, I could make it in 10. I prayed to God that Tatum hadn't tied the boy to the tracks, or if he had, he'd untied him by now. "LJ!" It was Anaya, the other Simmons kid. She was 17, in my grade in school. She was pretty, smart, and had the most beautiful voice I'd ever heard, but I didn't have time to listen to her at the moment. I slowed my run to a jog and tried to get the words out between gasping breaths. "Hey, Anaya, I can't talk right now. I'm kind of busy. I'm looking for my brother. Have you seen him?" she inquired, her concerned eyes a rich honey color that I was particularly drawn to. I swallowed hard, trying to think where to begin. Oh, forget it. I didn't have time. Come with me, I panted, grabbing her hand and pulling her along, our combined footsteps beating out a countdown on the road. The ghost train was in my chest now, the rumble merging with my heartbeat and shaking me to the core. He's at the railway. We gotta get him, I explained, as Anaya looked up at me in surprise. Why? She breathed, taking 2 steps to my stride. Why is he there? Heat flushed my neck and my mouth was glued with guilt. I pretended not to hear her and ran faster, the railway station looming on the horizon. Blood and fear and righteous anger pumped through my heart so forcefully that I was afraid it might burst before I got to the railway. The sound of that train was roaring in my ears, drowning out everything else. I felt like I was dying. Sweat was dripping into my eyes as I veered to the left, heading for the huddle of shapes, Tatum and his boys, clustered on the tracks. Anaya was yelling her brother's name at the top of her lungs, looking around. I jerked her in the direction of the group on the tracks. I had to get to Tatum before he finished the job, or else that kid was a goner. Tatum! I yelled, skidding to a stop at the edge of the grass. Tatum, you've got to get off the tracks! No one, not even Tatum, was paying me any attention. He was bent over the tracks. He wasn't going to stop. Tatum! I bellowed, using every ounce of breath in my lungs. The train! The train's coming now! Tatum finally looked at me with those pale, pale eyes of his, every freckle on his face standing out like the dot of a laser pointer. I saw him mouth the word, "What?" The expression on his face blank. Somebody was yelling my name from very far away. It might have been Anaya, but it was too indistinct to hear, and the sounds in my head, the rolling of the train, the harsh clacking of the wheels, and the thunderous shaking of the ground drowned it out. Horrified, I realized that the ground was really shaking this time. The real train, not the guilt-ridden ghost train in my head, was coming, and I could feel it vibrating up into the soles of my shoes as I began to sprint down the tracks, screaming Tatum's name like I was dying. He gaped at me, shock glazing his eyes, and then the whistle blew. I could see the face of the train, like the face of a giant black bug, blurred by waves of heat. Everything went silent, except for the crunch of my feet as they hit the gravel. I hit Tatum with more force than I had expected, sending him sprawling down the incline. The rest of the boys scattered, scared and confused as the whistle blew again. Somebody else was calling my name, soft and frightened. It was a Simmons kid, Donovan, his face dead pale and tear-stained. The knots around his wrists were unfinished, loose enough for me to stick my fingers through, but they were still tough in coming out, and the sweat slicking my hands didn't help. Almost there, I murmured to myself, knowing full well I sounded insane. I could see bits of gravel bouncing and rattling around me, the roughness of the rope burning my fingers as I rushed to undo the knots, Donovan whimpering. A moan of relief bubbled up in my throat as the rope slipped off the boy's wrists. Crying a bit myself, I gathered him up in my arms, the keening shrill of the whistle eating away at my brain, and we rolled off the tracks, eyes squeezed shut. There was a roar that seemed to go on forever, then a great heaving rush of breath, and finally silence. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, and Donovan's where mine should have been, fast and quiet. I could have stayed there for the rest of my life, the little Simmons boy wrapped up in my arms, the thunder of the train still echoing in my ears, but life went on. It had to. So I stood up, Donovan's hand in mine, and began to walk back to Anaya, her eyes glowing golden in this time.